Take a look at these photos and the footage circulating online. It shows the posters bearing anti-Semitic conspiracy theory slogans such as "Israel did 9/11," "I knew Epstein personally," in reference to Jeffrey Epstein. On the poster of Hamas's youngest hostage, 1-year-old Kfir Bibas, who just celebrated his first birthday in captivity, someone wrote, "Head still on." Well, joining me now to discuss this in more depth from New York is David Christopher Kaufman, an adjunct fellow at the Tel Aviv Institute. Thank you so much for taking the time to be with me here this evening.
Thank you.
The graffiti was discovered yesterday, being Monday, as university students returned to campus after winter break. Quite the sight to see upon returning. Reportedly, a group of Israeli students at the university have already filed a complaint with the administration, but how likely is it that something will actually be done to address this?
I would say not very likely, which is quite concerning. It's once again, Harvard is at the center of this anti-Semitism storm that's taking over the nation, both in higher education and across the country. Don't forget, Harvard was the first place that there was a mass protest and declaration of blaming Israel for the attacks on October 7th. Then we saw the dismal response by its leadership and the ongoing drama with Claudine Gay. And now we're back to students returning from their homes, returning from break, and coming back to Harvard with posters of defaced posters of little Kfir Bibas and accusations that the hostages in some way have a connection to nefarious pedophile Jeffrey Epstein, and accusations that Israel was behind 9/11. What's most concerning is that, Harvard with $50 billion in resources, Harvard with hundreds of years of academic history, Harvard as the leading academic light in the country, they knew that these students were coming back yesterday. We knew that they're returning to class. Why wasn't something done to protect them? Why wasn't there extra effort made to ensure that students came back and felt safe? So once again, we have Harvard at the center of all institutions, even after Claudine Gay, even after these mass protests. Once again, Harvard's at the center of this anti-Semitism storm, and nothing's being done.
Harvard University, which has faced, as you mentioned, accusations of letting anti-Semitism run rampant on campus, hasn't commented as of yet on the posters, but they've also asserted that the claims are grossly exaggerated. So often there's the chance of from the river to the sea on campus. So many who chanted won't even be able to tell you what river and what sea they're referring to. So is it brainwashing, ignorance, or just blatant anti-Semitism that many students who stand behind it are calling literally for the total elimination of the state of Israel?
Yeah, so I think it's a bit of both. I mean, there are plenty of students who are leading these protests around the country who clearly believe in what they're saying, and they sort of stake their academic and probably professional futures on this belief, on ending what they call the occupation, ending the genocide. And there are probably a vast number of followers who, see this as a trendy cause, a trendy woke cause du jour, which is going to get them likes on social media and high fives amongst their friends. I think the bigger issue here is what's happening at Harvard and other campuses, and this explosion of anti-Semitism is really a distraction from some of the bigger issues. Today we're having the primaries in New Hampshire. The Oscars have just been announced. There's talk of a ceasefire. Within all of these major news events sit Israel, Gaza, Palestine, Hamas, the kidnapped hostages. This is really emerging as the central narrative of every major issue in the world today, with huge implications politically, economically, geopolitically. And what we're talking about are a bunch of students defacing posters. We're seeing cities across America officially demand ceasefires, San Francisco and Chicago. Also smaller cities like Burlington, Vermont. We're seeing big protests in Denver shutting down the city center. We saw a fashion show yesterday in Paris ending with a pro-Gaza message. So what we're seeing is this focus on Israel as the aggressor, Israel as the cause of this problem, infiltrating, permeating every major topic today in the news cycle. And this is what's most concerning. We're talking about posters, but really this has impact way beyond Harvard to really every single major issue today.
Well, let's touch a little bit more on that, because often when Jews or Israelis take to the streets, and I'd say more often than not, they're described as peaceful rallies, often holding up posters of those that are still being held hostage in the Gaza Strip or calling for an end to the fighting. But the pro-Palestinian rallies are usually defined as protests, riots. They tend to be very disruptive and often at times have violence. Both sides, so to speak, have a dog in this fight, but they aren't playing by the same rules. Why is that?
Why is that? Well, yes. I mean, we now exist in the United States that's been heavily radicalized by almost 4 years of intense social justice movements that began with the Black Lives Matter movement with the fall, summer of 2004. As I've discussed before with some of your colleagues, that movement was heavily dominated by the idea of defund the police. And in many ways, the defund the police chance ideology very much worked. Major cities across America have seen their police departments reduced by upwards of 20%. So there literally aren't enough, cops on the ground to take down the bad guys when they're rampaging through the street, calling for Jewish blood. At the same time, cities across America have huge migrant problems. In New York, we have tens of thousands of illegal migrants who crowded into the city, distracting law enforcement, distracting resources. So they're just, and you also have laws that have been put in place that make it harder to keep those who might be arrested, if there were police, to actually arrest them in jail. So there's really no incentive for these protesters not to be violent. In an earlier age, the thinking would have been, if we rampage through city streets, threatening a murder and intimidating people, we'll be arrested. But that's just not the case anymore in the United States. And these protesters know that. These protests are also heavily tinged with racial implications, because the fact that so many of the pro-Palestinian and pro-Hamas protesters are people of color. So that touches into longstanding grievances between communities of color and Caucasians, and the idea that they're overtly targeted by the police. So these protests, again, touch upon everything that's going on in the culture right now. And we're seeing them everywhere. We saw them at Sundance this past week. And there doesn't seem to be any sort of, nothing seems to be off limits. There's a relentlessness to this, that nothing is beyond the pale.
Right, but it's absolutely important to be continuously talking about it and making sure that it does get into the news cycles for exactly what it is, which is hate speech. David Christopher Kaufman, an adjunct fellow at the Tel Aviv Institute, I want to thank you so very much for joining us.